I'm smiling. Come on. Maybe Wyatt. Oh, no, I can't say it. No, I'm actually live. Now I'm going to have to actually be nice to you guys. That stinks. I actually don't even know if I can, because for all I know, you've got to turn in your internet permission form because you're irresponsible. That's right, Wyatt Sawatsky is irresponsible. That is now. Oh, it totally shows it backwards. Don't try to watch that. Like, make sure you have it open and then maybe just listen to it because it looks like it's all backwards. All right, we'll see how this goes. I'm guessing I talk loud enough so we should be able to hear it. But chapter 2, again, we're talking about establishing the English colonies here, some of their locations, and some of the early things that they did. And so today we're taking a look at the northern colonies, roughly 1619 to 1700. The nice thing about chapters 2 and 3, as I've said in the video yesterday, is they're both pretty short. So we can combine them together. This is going to get us probably to a quiz. We're looking like midweek of next week. We'll have a discussion question that will be posted. Tomorrow's a reading day for you, just to finish up reading chapter 2. Monday, I'll start reading chapter 3 out there. We'll have a discussion question, and we'll spend a day on that, and then we'll take a quiz. All right, Protestant Reformation produces Puritanism. A couple of things. Number one, you talked about this in world history a ton, right? Martin Luther. I do think it's important for you to understand Martin Luther never intended to start the Lutheran sect of the Christian religion. Right? That wasn't his plan. He was trying to fix the Catholic religion. It was the only Christian religion that existed at the time, and it had gotten askew, and that's probably the nicest way to put it. It wasn't necessarily following a good path, and by that I mean money was changing some of their principles. They were obsessed with building the biggest churches because at that time, building the biggest church meant you were the greatest religion. Okay? So Martin Luther attempts to fix that. The key moment, obviously, is pounding his 95 Thesis on the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral. All right? And it starts the Protestant Reformation. The Lutheran religion doesn't come around for a while. Instead, Martin Luther's followers are called Protestants because they were protesting the Catholic religion. Does that make sense? Like Lutherans don't come around for a while yet. A tiny group of Puritans called separatists broke away from the Church of England. The Church of England was a Protestant church. It's a Protestant church because it's protesting the Catholic Church again. And we've already kind of established this had a lot to do with politics more so than religion. In Catholic countries, the king still answered to the Pope. The English king didn't want to answer to the Pope anymore, so they had broken away, which started the whole conflict between Spain and England, and ultimately ends with the defeat of the Spanish Armada, but then opens up settlement of the colonies to the English. Now we have these Puritans, and again, if we take a look at the word Puritan, they wanted to purify the church, to make it better. Again, they thought that there was some corruption within the church, and so basically they're trying to, I'm trying to think of the best way to summarize this. Fearing that his subjects would defy him both as their political leader and spiritual leader, King James I, the head of state of England and the head of church from 1603 to 1625, threatened to kick them out. They didn't think it was right that their head of state should also be their head of church. Okay? So that's probably the easiest way for me to say. They're literally thinking there should be a separation there. Okay? And that should strike a chord with you because there is supposed to be a separation between church and state. In this country, ironically, it won't be this group that brings that concept here. But and that is one of the things that we'll find out. The people that are leaving England because they think something is broken, and they go, these separatists, the Puritans, whatever you want to call them, when they get here, they act just like the people in England had acted towards them. They make it, if you're not a Puritan, they kick you out. If you don't go to church, you get kicked out. You have to follow very strictly their rules. So they didn't necessarily, and I think that's kind of one of the big myths, people came here for religious freedom. They came here to worship their religion, but they didn't always offer religious freedom. Okay, there'll be, Connecticut and Rhode Island are probably the most religiously free, and those are colonies that are started by people who were kicked out of Puritan colonies. Does that make sense? And then the idea of a separation between church and state starts to form there. Also a colony like Pennsylvania was very religiously free because William Penn was a Quaker, and that's what they believed, that everybody should be able to worship the way they want. All right. The Pilgrims end their pilgrimage at Plymouth. So the Mayflower Compact, this is important. That's why it's in bold. It is a simple agreement to form a crude government and to submit to the will of the majority under the regulations agreed upon. Essentially, a democracy, right? If there's 41 adult males at this time alive, they go in, they're going to say, do we build a church or do we build a fence for protection? Which one is our priority? And if 21 of them say, build the church, then they all agree to build the church. Simple majority rule. Does that make sense? So once you get over that 50% threshold, then you get to, they agreed that they would do that. Often considered to be the first, attempt at a government in America. And the interesting thing is the only reason that they're doing this is because they're completely lost. And by that, I mean, they were attempting to land in Virginia, but they ended up essentially in Massachusetts. And they realized that when they got there, and there was no form of government for them there. In Virginia, there was a charter and a compact that was already established. And here there was nothing. So they had to create something. And they called it the Mayflower Compact because that was the name of the boat that they were on. First winter, only 44 out of 102 survive. 1621 was the first Thanksgiving Day in New England. Obviously, the natives there helped them immensely to survive. William Bradford was elected 30 times as the governor of the Pilgrims in the annual elections. He was a self-taught scholar who read Hebrew, Greek, Latin, French, and Dutch. He's a pilgrim leader. He's a religious leader. That's why he can read Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. So that was generally the language of the Bibles. I always think it's interesting. It says William Bradford was elected 30 times. How long was the term? I mean, that's impressive, but if the term was every 6 months, then it's 15 years. But if it's every 2 years, then he was 60 years the leader. Like, it's kind of an important piece of information. And I honestly don't know how long the term was. All right, this is a picture of a typical pilgrim village. You see the fences again. We talked about the English concept of land ownership and property. You can see things kind of fenced off. Obviously, they'll have some livestock eventually brought over here. And typical, they're going to build it on a hill. What building do you think would be at the peak of the hill, or what's the most important building to them? The church, right? It's the church. There'll be a very famous sermon that comes out about being, the top of the hill or the church on the hill, as a guide or a beacon for others to follow. But they want the church to be the center of attention, the center of the town. All right, so here we see the immigration patterns coming out of England, roughly 189,000, over 110,000 to the West Indies. And the reason for this is, number one, if you could choose, you want to live in New England or, the Caribbean, which one would you rather be in? One's got a much better climate, but the reality of it is this has an established profit. Anybody know what they're doing there to make profit? It's sugarcane, yeah. They're growing sugarcane. So there's a way to make money there. This is a mystery. We're not entirely sure. They don't know. We'll see. See what you can do. Maybe it's just to come and survive. Maybe it's just to settle. Maybe it's to try to create, a bastion for your religion. Chesapeake, again, is a little bit more temperate climate, and also pretty soon tobacco is going to take hold. And for a short time, tobacco is immensely profitable, but it declines very rapidly. And the reason it declines very rapidly is the tobacco crop itself is kind of hard on the soil. And so it's difficult to continuously grow it in the same spot over time. The crop degrades. And then anybody could do it. You could grow it almost anywhere. And essentially they saturate the market. So when you flood the market with a product, what happens to the value of the product? It goes down. And then it became harder to grow and there was less demand and it kind of spreads out. All right, Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams. So I talked about these two people, or I talked about at least the beginning of the separation of church and state. Anne Hutchinson was an intelligent woman who challenged the Puritan orthodoxy by arguing the truly saved need not to bother to obey the laws of God or man. She was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony because of her challenges to the church. What she was attempting to say here, in my kind of rude way to make sense for you, not that the truly saved need not bother to obey the laws of God or man, but the truly saved wouldn't do anything wrong. Does that make sense? And that oftentimes, again, male religious leaders were the only ones who were technically allowed to interpret what the Bible meant. And what if they weren't right? Right? It's the same thing. Like you're sitting in history class and I'm up here and I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just making stuff up. Right? What if you're learning wrong? And she's questioning that. And number one, she's a woman, so that really shouldn't happen. But number two, she's really good, by the way. Like she really understands the Bible. She has a tremendous aptitude for it. And it's not written in here, but it's an interesting story. She's ultimately put on trial by the Puritan orthodoxy, and they bring her in, and they're just going to, essentially, they want to upstage her. So they put her on this trial, and they just open up the Bible, and they start quizzing her, hammering questions, and she gets them all right for like 2 or 3 days. They're just asking her questions. She's nailing it. She's spot on. And they're kind of exasperated. And one of them says, "How do you know this?" And she said, "Because I hear it from God." And I said, "Oh, good, you're out. Because God only talks to priests and you're not a priest, so you're a liar." The end. She gets kicked out. And that's it. Right? That was the way to get it. Roger Williams was a popular Salem minister who also challenged the church. He's an extreme separatist, and he will also be banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. As they are banished, regardless of their religious thoughts, what's really starting to creep in here is the idea that religion shouldn't dictate your government and government shouldn't dictate your religion. Okay, the idea of separation of church and state. That's what's creeping in here. We're going to see that come out of Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams when we take a look at the creation of some of these northern colonies. That's it. The statue of Anne Hutchinson. Roger Williams fled to Rhode Island area in 1636. There he established religious freedom for all kinds of people. Even though he's an extreme separatist, he is very, very religious, very religious. But he doesn't think that religion and government should be tied together. In other words, you could still be very active in the government and not very active in religion, or the other way around. The Puritans believed in order to be active in government, you had to be active in the church, that they were connected and had to stay connected. It's interesting when you think of, it's a little off topic or a little random, but how many of you have ever heard of the town New Haven? Where is it located? It's in Connecticut. Now, when you know this story, do you know why that town is called New Haven? Right? A haven is a place that offers you protection. It's new because they're banished from the Massachusetts colony, so they go to a new haven. And that becomes the name of the town. All right, Hartford was founded in 1635. Boston Puritans settled into the Hartford area led by the Reverend Thomas Hooker. In 1639, the settlers of New Connecticut River Colony drafted a document known as the Fundamental Orders. Okay? It established a regime democratically controlled by substantial citizens. And I put substantial in quotes because obviously that's an arbitrary term. Like what is a substantial citizen? What's different about this is it does not say by religious leaders. You just had to be a substantial citizen. And roughly over time, that's going to translate into a land-owning male. Okay, and that's going to be really, I don't want to say the law of the land, but kind of the blueprint that others follow for a great deal of time. Because remember, women don't get the right to vote in every election across this country until 1920. And so for a long time, male is the criteria. And also for a long time, having to own land is a big part of the criteria as well. All right, so a map here, and we can see kind of, the patterns that are forming here. Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is established, and we have Plymouth here, established in 1620. These are going to be kind of the central hub, for lack of a better way of describing. We'll see some immigration going north. A lot of this is going south, and again, the people going south typically are the people that are being kicked out, And at least one of my favorite stories when I was a kid, and they were reading, or we were going through the development of the colonies, the Puritans, we think about going to church today, and we think about an hour on Sunday or hour on Saturday evening, or whatever it might be, but roughly an hour. Like, it almost doesn't matter what denomination you are. Church is roughly an hour. It's like some sort of standard. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's generally what it is. A Puritan church was pretty much so the whole day. It could be 8 hours, could be 12 hours, could be 14. And the ushers, the people that would walk you to your seats as you came in, they had really long poles, and they would have a turkey feather tied to the end of it. And so as you nodded off, fell asleep while the priest was talking, they would take that pole, they would reach across the aisle, and they would tickle your face to wake you up, keep you awake during that time. I always thought that was kind of funny. You can imagine they were pretty busy at about hour 3 or 4, starting to nod off, considering I see people nod off while I'm talking in about 10 to 15 minutes, but I think I have an art form to it. Very soothing voice, right, Wyatt?
Not really.
All right, 1686, the Dominion of New England was created. The leader of the Dominion of New England was Sir Edmund Andros, an able English military man. He established headquarters in puritanical Boston, again controlled by Puritans. Andros stopped the town meetings, laid heavy restrictions on the courts, the press, and the schools, and revoked all land titles. Edmund Andros was one of these guys that was sent in to kind of crack down on this feeling of independence that the colonies were starting to establish. We're talking about all these different laws and ways that they're forming governments, right? But they're still technically English citizens, subject to whatever the king says. Or, in this case, now there's going to be a parliament as well. And there's a concept known as salutary neglect. And what that means is, as long as the colonies were making money or somehow being profitable for England, they kind of left them alone. And as a result of leaving them alone, their sense of independence is growing. And the fact they're going to have to create some sort of government structure, which they were. And then, and this happens from time to time, England decides, they're getting a little too independent, and they'll crack down. And they'll send these governors over to kind of crack the whip, if you will. And Sir Edmund Andros is one of those guys. He's sent over here to kind of tighten the ship or tighten the reins. And a lot of times, the fatal flaw that the king, when they would send somebody over, they wouldn't pay them. They would say, well, you can get paid by collecting taxes within the colonies. But the colonists were given the power to tax themselves, which is why there's going to be a huge outrage when England imposes taxes on them, and you're going to hear the phrase no taxation without representation. They were okay with paying a tax within their colonies to support their government structure. And so this is a fatal flaw because they controlled how much the governor got paid. And so oftentimes when this new English governor would come over to crack the whip, they would just say, we're not going to pay you that. And then they would want money. So they would say, okay, we'll loosen the reins. It was called the power of the purse, okay? Having the ability to, control somebody. Edmund Andros had a ton of money. He said, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want. And he did. He'll be around for a while. But when he does these things, he's kind of establishing the idea that we want freedom of the press, right? We want a fair and impartial jury, So all of these things are laying the groundwork for the future of what will become the United States. There he is, Edmund Andros. This is Andros Dominion of New England, and ultimately it's going to break down fairly quickly just because there's so much unrest. It's pretty harsh. 1623 to 24, and again, make sure you're paying attention to the stuff that's underlined. The Dutch West India Company established New Netherland in the Hudson River area. It was made for its quick profit for fur trade. So New Netherland will eventually become New York, and New Amsterdam will eventually become New York City. The company also purchased Manhattan Island, roughly 22,000 acres, arguably the most valuable 22,000 acres probably in this country today, for a handful of trinkets. New Amsterdam, later New York City, was a company town. The Quakers were savagely abused. Quakers were being abused really around the world, and that's why Pennsylvania will become such a haven for them, to use a word that we've already talked about, because William Penn was a Quaker, and it is very religiously free. And the irony of Quakers being abused is
Quakers don't fight. They don't ever fight back. They just pray. And that's actually how they got the name Quakers, because when they prayed, they rocked back and forth. And so people called them Quakers because it looked like they were shaking. So them being abused is like picking on people who can't fight back. All right, so again, just taking a look at the map here, we can see some of the Native American tribes. They're going to come into play as expansion starts to go west. But here's New Netherland. That's the Hudson River, right? Manhattan Island. All these things. This is a Dutch area. It will be taken over by the English here very shortly. 1664, the Dutch were forced to surrender their territory, New Netherland, to the English when a strong English squadron, that's a group of ships, appeared off the coast of New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam was named New York after the Duke of York. Most of you have heard of Wall Street, right? It's the financial epicenter of this country. Anybody know why it's named Wall Street? Literally is where the wall was for New Amsterdam. That was the wall of the fort. So it's named after a wall. There is not even a fight, to be honest with you. The English just showed up with a lot of ships and said, you know what, this is a nice area, we're going to take it, and there isn't much you can do about it. Peter Stuyvesant, I don't think I pronounced that correctly. Mr. Westphier, who has a lot more Dutch in him than I do, can pronounce it a little better than me. But he was the governor. He attempts to fight a little bit, but nobody else does. They're all like, fine, we'll be English. Works for us. These are Quakers with the flat brimmed hats. And way back in the day, I don't know if this exists anymore, but they used to have Quaker oats. And it was a picture of William Penn. And honestly, don't know the significance of it, but it was one of the ways that you could identify them, why they had that type of hat, as opposed to the more typical colonial hat that you've all seen before, kind of that triangle shaped one. During this time, we're going to see a lot of things that will come up, and you see your typical, what we would associate with a pilgrim hat here. We're going to see some Salem witch trial stuff that will come up. So there's a wide variety of things, but the key here in this picture or illustration is we're looking at people gathering together. Okay, these small semblances of limited self-rule. But the idea of self-rule is now taking root amongst the average people. Does that make sense? Because at some point in time, this group of average people has to decide to fight the most powerful country in the world so that they can have their own self-rule. Right? It's literally David versus Goliath. There's no reason the United States or the 13 colonies at that time should ever win that war. They're outgunned, they're outtrained, the other side has more money, they have every conceivable advantage, except these were people that believed in a cause. And that's being established, 100 years earlier. All right, William Penn was attracted to the Quaker faith in 1660. 1681, he managed to secure from King Charles II an immense grant of fertile land in consideration of a monetary debt owed to the deceased father by the crown. The king called the area Pennsylvania, which literally means Penn's Woods. Okay, so he gives it to William Penn because the King of England owes a lot of money to William Penn's father. William Penn comes over here, established it as a very religiously free area. Treats Native Americans with a great deal of respect. Quakers in general treated everybody with respect. Okay? But at a time where strength was perceived by your ability to fight as opposed to not fighting,
oftentimes they're considered weak and were abused. But not as much in Pennsylvania. The irony of this is, like, the city of Philadelphia, one of the most violent cities in this country now. The city of brotherly love. There's a whole lot of reasons for that, and none of them are William Penn's fault. What time does this class end? 55. All right, I think we're going to make it. Quakers treated the Indians very well. Okay, I underlined that. I've said it about 20 times, but it is very important. Many immigrants came to Pennsylvania seeking religious freedom because it truly was free. Okay, other colonies were started in the name of religious freedom, but they didn't offer religious freedom. You had to worship their religion, or they wouldn't let you come, or they would kick you out. That's not the case in Pennsylvania. However, they did establish blue laws. Okay. Blue laws prevented ungodly revelers from staging plays. Don't do that. Okay, they are very strict when it comes to what could be considered offensive in the eyes of God. And they thought the play could be that. Playing cards or dice games, because that is gambling. Not good. And my favorite one, excessive hilarity. If you're laughing too much, you're not thinking about God enough. So, don't get carried away with laughter. Pennsylvania surpassed all but Massachusetts and Virginia as the most populous and wealthy colony. Obviously, it's going to be attractive to a lot of people. And keep in mind, this is a time where religion is still very strict and very strong in many people's lives. And, they're not unique for saying there shouldn't be gambling. Okay? Many religions believe that way. What's probably more unique is the plays and the excessive hilarity. The good news for Sanders is he would never get kicked out because he's never been excessively funny. That was kind of funny.
I laughed. I thought it
See?
was good.
Yeah, thank you. All right, here's William Penn dealing with the Native Americans. Not a super accurate drawing. Why? Remember I told you, and I pointed it out specifically, what was unique about the Quakers' hats? They're flat brimmed, right? And these aren't. Okay, they're much more flat. I don't know why they chose that style, but they did. And you can see it's a little bit, but some of these are really bent up. And that typically wouldn't be what they had, but this was the common style for everybody else. All right, the middle colonies, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania were known as the bread colonies because of their heavy exports of grain. So if you can remember grain and bread in the middle colonies, you're in good shape. Colonies were more ethnically mixed than the other colonies, and the people were given more religious tolerance than in any other colonies. Ben Franklin was born in Boston, Massachusetts. In 1706, he moves to Philadelphia at the age of 17. They're really mixed because of their location. Okay? You have Puritans in the north. You're essentially going to have Anglicans or Church of England in the south, and you're going to have them kind of filling in between. And so it just becomes more diverse. And of course, Pennsylvania was very open, and so that attracts diversity, and that diversity spills over the borders a little bit. This is one of Ben Franklin's. Somehow was traced to Ben Franklin, and the textbook has a better definition. I should have reminded myself, but like somebody found it at an auction or something at one point in time. The unique thing was we looked it up to see how much it was worth, and people were paying tons of money for this. This is sort of like someone buys the old painting, and they just want the frame, so they cut the painting out and they find an original copy of the Constitution stuck in it, and it's worth like $5 million, and they buy it for $5, right? It was the same kind of concept here. Somebody found this one, was able to trace it back to a relative of Ben Franklin. Either Ben Franklin had it
or a very near relative of his. That's it. That's chapter 3. So tomorrow then, reading day for you guys. Monday, we'll probably take a look at a discussion question along with some reading. I would say if you finish up chapter 2, go ahead and start on chapter 3. That'd be a good idea to get that rolling as well. I'm looking at, Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe for the next quiz. And by and large, you guys did well on the first quiz. They're all graded. I just haven't had a chance to put them in Infinite Campus yet, but I'll get that done today. So you should be able to see what your grade was. All right. The end.
How many people were in that?
What's that?
How many people?
Well, nobody, because I didn't put the link out.